Good evening and welcome everyone to Worlds Tonight, 2016 edition. I am Rivington Bisson III here, joined by Joshua Jatt, Leesman, and Martin Deficio Lunga. We're looking at opening day right now, which wrapped up here in San Francisco just a little while ago. Some crazy things. We'll talk about Martin's sadness in just a bit. We got to look at groups A, C, and D today, shaking things up. And our first match really coming out of the transatlantic clash. Everybody was waiting for it. It's been the long-awaited match, and oh boy, did it deliver.
Yeah, Deficio, what did you think of that game? I thought it was a tremendous display of League of Legends.
I mean, I actually think CLG played extremely well. So instead of like flaming G2 specifically, I actually rather praise CLG in this game. I think some of the shot calling they showed was fantastic. They didn't have any surprise picks. It was actually very standard pick coming from them, but just much better, you know, game plan than G2.
Yeah, and I really love their strategy, getting the strength in the bottom lane, and then just the way they were able to maneuver around their objectives. Like right here when the Jace was off in the side lane without teleport, they just very easily get the Baron buff. Then they transitioned it into later team fights, and they knew their limits, right? Stixxay was able to sustain up. This was after a really long fight that happened around the inhibitor. And then I think he flashes over wall to the two carries of G2 to eliminate them here in this fight. CLG actually looked incredible in this game.
Yeah, I said this during the cast, you know, it doesn't matter if G2's, you know, let's say solo laners in this case had better picks and were actually winning the solo lanes, that Trick, you know, were looking like the better jungler on paper. It doesn't matter because CLG actually was the better team and they were able to just coordinate plays in the bottom lane around when Sven was alone or when like Expect wasn't ready to teleport, which was actually kind of odd because he didn't TP like multiple times in this game, and it just gave so many advantages to CLG on the bottom side.
Right, and I'm sorry, Deficio, but things just did not get any better. H2K rather, in their debut match against AHQ as a tongue twister, and that also fell the same way.
And this was one of the uglier games we had today, actually, because there was a little bit of an advantage for H2K, and they had a bit of an opportunity to win, but it definitely didn't start well for them with that first split up in the top side.
No, and honestly, this was a game where it went a lot like expected, where H2K would do well early game, you know, stronger laners than AHQ had, but then like now you see mid game already, and you start seeing these mistakes where H2K are like setting up weird plays while they don't actually have to, and also they have like zero control of the map. Ends up being a big Baron fight. HQ obviously wins the Baron fight in the end, where Arn flashes over. Check him out there on your replay.
That was just such a gorgeous splash from Arn. It was also the first Jinx we got to see at this World Championship. I thought he played it pretty well, and you wouldn't have expected him to be playing that into Forgiven's lane when you're thinking about Forgiven's reputation as a laner, but they did it just fine, and they ended up pulling out this pretty late game 47-minute victory.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of AHQ of last year, honestly, where they also had some of these late game
gold graph. It's very close, and then
it's early game team on the side of H2K, you know, late game team for AHQ, and they couldn't close.
Absolutely, but we did see the biggest surprise of the day when CB Lulz INTZ pulled out a monumental upset against LPL's Edward Game.
I had no idea what was happening in this game because this was completely unexpected. They beat the best team from China, like by far the best team from China coming into this. And Yang and Revolta played so well during this
They dismantled the EDG.
Oh, I love this one. Clearlove is like dashing in a straight line when Asher flies at him, and he's like, oh, okay, got hit, and then Revolta again. And honestly, yeah, what happened? Well, Yang and Revolta happened in this game here. They honestly camped and destroyed the top lane. They were the big carries in team fights as well. It's impressive to see that kind of performance.
It's crazy that this happened on day one, too, because this is perhaps, as far as expectations going into the match, the largest upset we've had in World's history.
Absolutely, it's been amazing so far, but also in a much anticipated matchup, we did see LPL, Royal Never Give Up, finally get on that board against TSM in the final match.
And just judging, you know, from performance on day one, then RNG actually looks like a stronger team than EDG, because obviously, of course, EDG lost. But while this was a risky or a poor start by RNG, we only got to see ML actually die. We don't want to see the rest. There's some NA producers that are like, just cut away from the rest. We don't want to show that.
He killed Hecarim. Look at Misfit scared his
Great play, great play.
Solid cares. Look at that gold graph, though. It just...
I just should have cut that off as well. They should have just kept it when they were actually heading. Don't be like cut.
TSM only plays until 32 minutes. That was their average game time in the summer split. After that, the game doesn't matter anymore. But really, the reason the gold graph happened like this is because RNG had such a good team fighting composition, and TSM wasn't able to close the game before that point. So once RNG got to the team fight phase, they just demolished TSM.
And even if RNG didn't have, you know, a sick team fighting comp, I think they probably still would actually won the game because Mata was just an absolute god on Alistar.
Like, you were wondering, he kind of had a wake-up period, but he got there.
You know, he slumped for the entire playoffs in the LPL, has his boot camp now, comes into Worlds, gets Alistar in the remade game. He didn't pick Alistar in the first game, but got in the second one, and just completely destroyed TSM. Doublelift got caught out like 5 times in this game by just Martha flashing on him.
Crazy stuff. And with 6 games down, every group besides B has 2 teams tied at 1, who's still, with 2 rather, still looking for a win.
I feel like Group C is the most fascinating one at this point. I think overall in the day, you weren't expecting TSM to lose. I was giving it a 60-40 yesterday, but by the time that game rolled around, watching EDG lose to INTZ, because you judge a lot based on region, right? And COG looked good, you're thinking, okay, NA's really strong. Oh, China's not looking that strong. Clearly TSM's gonna have a good chance in this one. No, that's actually not what happens. Worlds is crazy as usual.
I guess we saw like a few trends maybe, like European teams macro-wise was extremely poor today. Like watching H2K run around Baron, you know, for 10 minutes, basically giving HQ time to scale, not even understanding to put a ward behind the Baron pit in the first place.
Right.
That is really, really poor macro execution in the mid to late game. G2 got out-shock-called by CLG, honestly, in the bottom lane. So the European teams really need to step up, you know, their understanding of how to play the map.
I'm gonna give you time to talk about it in a little bit. Don't worry, Deficio. The teams of Group B get their shot on stage tomorrow with the reigning world champions, SK Telecom T1, facing off against Cloud9, while the LMS's Flash Wolves will make their debut against LPL's IMA. After that, Group D takes over, followed by Group C to wrap up the day. We'll look ahead in just a minute, but for everyone watching in client, check out youtube.com/LOLesports for the full version of Worlds tonight.
So, Deficio.
No.
The big story, let me know what you think about TSM. Let me know what you think about Europe.
Kind
Every
of a rough
European team plays.
day there, Deficio, bro.
Yeah, so I've already cried quite a bit for about an hour backstage, you know, after
Used
Splice
all my
lost again.
tissues.
I did expect Splice to lose, obviously, against Samsung. The first 2 games were the surprises for me. And honestly, it wasn't even the fact they lost. It was just how poorly they played in the mid to late game that disappointed me. Because both G2 and H2K actually had good starts to the game. You know, the first one on top lane looked fine with Expect, and H2K got a small lead. I'm like, okay, this is looking fine. And then everything just goes wrong. G2 reacted much slower than CLG. Whenever CLG made plays on the bottom lane, and G2 would like walk in one by one and just end up dying. And H2K obviously just had no idea what to do in the mid to late game and just bought or gave so much time to AHQ. So this was a super, super rough day as a European fan. Of course, I'm glad I have you guys here to help me.
It'll be okay.
I think they're gonna bounce back. I think already tomorrow, like H2K needs to get some revenge, and they're playing INTZ, who obviously had a great game today. Like, H2K has to almost win that game to bounce back in this group. If you go down 0-2 already, it looks almost impossible to get out.
It does. Or sometimes if you go up 9-0, then you can go 0-10 sometimes. But to kind of just branch off of the G2 match, that was CLG's debut match here at Worlds. They were able to get that victory, and that was a big question as well.
I thought Xmithy looked super good in that game, Riv. And I thought COG in general looked really good in that game. He was obviously the player of the game in that matchup. But his Olaf, I think, he was playing Olaf before they got the coaching help of Reignover, but I do think it was influenced a little bit as far as his ability to path in the early game. I thought Stixxay and Aftermoon were completely on point. I thought Darshan, even though he lost lane by about 1 trillion CS, had the most impactful teleports, and it was very much like the impact he was having at MSI.
Yeah.
And it almost looked like Summer Split didn't happen for COG. Hey, they're great after MSI. Look at how strong these guys can be. Don't worry about those 3 months where we meandered about in North America and finished 4th. We're here, guys, because it seemed like they pretty much just picked up right where they left off in Shanghai.
That was kind of just taking that team and putting it in here. Another thing we have to talk about, obviously one of the biggest upsets we've ever seen. You said it, bigger than the kaboom. INTZ taking down Edward Gaming.
I'm still recovering from that one a little bit. I didn't expect it to happen in any way. Like, no, I think in some ways, now that we've been able to reflect a little bit, obviously, Yang and Revolta played well, but EDG was not prepared for that game in any way, shape, or form. They didn't seem to have a plan. I think they were expecting to just win every lane by about 30 CS and then, well, what naturally win team fights and siege them because they didn't have map rotations, they didn't have good gank timings, and they got completely abused.
I mean, you wouldn't have picked the Irelia top lane in this kind of game when you actually had a really good composition. Otherwise, for the top lane who's not been a carry, you know, on your team, all split long, you wouldn't just randomly give him Irelia if you really, really respected your opponent. So actually, I think EDG got punished for that. I think also in the Rocks Tigers game earlier against Albus Nox, they also got kind of surprised in the first 10 minutes. There's a lot of action happening.
Exactly.
They managed to bounce back, obviously, and actually win that game. But EDG, once they fell behind, it was like they didn't even know what hit them, and Mouse just kept getting ganked over and over.
And is that to be seen as kind of a big worry? Will they just kind of shake that off? Because we expect it to almost be kind of TSMS, like we saw TSM RNG, TSM ahead in the early, and then RNG takes it back. Is EDG going to come back to that form where they just take games back?
I think it's a big worry, but I still think they're going to be okay in that group. I don't think there's any other Titans in that group where if they lose one game, they're not going to be able to get it back. But the fact that it was able to happen when there's supposed to be this undefeated, dominant Chinese team is very worrying. They need to play a lot better.
Yeah, and also just looking at individual player performance, which you can sometimes judge more from just one game than like the entire team. You had obviously Mouse getting destroyed up in the top lane. You had really no one else stepping up other than the bottom lane in this game. Like Deft and Mako, they won the laning phase, and that was it. Like Clearlove actually didn't do anything in this game. Revolta was way more impactful than he was. So I was kind of disappointed looking at some of the individual players on EDG in a game like this, because they should individually either be, even in Mouse case, like as good as Yang, but he was actually worse than Yang completely. And then, of course, the rest of the members then you would expect to actually be better. These are world-class players, #1 team in LPL. No, they actually didn't shine except for the bot lane, and that just wasn't enough to really carry the game for EDG. So really disappointed in them, but I think INTZ deserved that win. They actually played it really well. They closed it out. It's just great for them.
And the thing I'm really fascinated about really quickly is what does this actually mean for INTZ in the group? Because
they can get out.
They can actually get out now. The H2K AHQ game did not look clean. Everyone was expecting a 6-0 from EDG and maybe even like an 0-6 or a 1-5 from INTZ. When they beat the best team right off the bat like that, it could happen. They got to be really excited now.
All right. Well, as we said earlier, we will get our first look at Group B starting tomorrow with SKT versus C9. Gentlemen, care to throw up a prediction?
Even if I flipped a coin, I'd be like substantially better than the analyst desk today. I think they were combined something like 2-8 in their
rough
predictions.
day for the analyst desk.
I'm going to say the only thing that's been consistent so far in this tournament is actually the Korean teams. They've actually won their games. Samsung beat Splice, obviously Rocks Tigers beat Albus earlier. I think SKT comes into this game as a slight favorite, but I actually don't think it's by a lot. I think C9 has a lot of ways they can win these games. It's only a best out of one, and there's so many question marks with SKT. Bengi obviously playing in the jungle. We don't know how he's going to perform because we have barely seen him for most of the summer split, where Blank has been playing most of the time. So I have a lot of question marks, when it comes to SKT. I do trust the late game a lot. So it's going to be like a battle of can C9 snowball early, or can SKT take it to late game?
So if the coin fell, which side would you want it to fall on, Jatt? I have to ask.
Want it or expecting it?
No. So I don't think any of these games have been easy to predict.
Agreed.
I'll just say C9. I don't think that SKT necessarily has the early group output as far as things normally go. I think as far as Worlds has gone in the past few years, SKT and Korean teams have actually started a little bit slow. I still think SKT is the best team in the group, but we're going to have some differences on this desk. I think C9, especially with the way COG played and the wildness that has happened at Worlds so far, have some chances to win. I'm going to pick
a little bit of that hometown love may come shining through for Cloud9. So we'll get a look at that first matchup first thing tomorrow, I should say. But for now, that is all from us here at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. From us here in San Francisco, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow as the 2016 League of Legends World Championship continues.
And it's 2 kills for Counter Logic Gaming.